Hello fellow 3D enthusiasts, my name is Ian, and today I wanted to share with you a few tips that can help you get footage that is easier to track. Now when I started in visual effects, I had the most difficult time getting anything to track correctly, and a lot of that difficulty came from the footage that I was trying to track. So I'm just going to go over 4 tips here, and the first of those is don't use shaky footage, because the enemy of tracking is motion blur. And if we have crazy shaky whip pans, that really adds a lot of motion blur and it's really hard to track, and in post-production you'll be banging your head against the wall. Now if the story happened to call for something like a whip pan like that, one thing I recommend doing if you absolutely need to have crazy camera movements is to make it so that your shutter is closing quicker, and that way it doesn't capture a whole bunch of motion blur. But let's move on to tip number 2 here, and that is try not to get dark footage. And dark footage can be hard to track because it introduces a lot of noise. And when you have things like going off in the frame and you're trying to track one certain part of it, it really tends to upset your tracking markers. Now for tip number 3, try not to get anything that goes like this across the frame, because at that moment you're going to lose all of your trackers that are all back here and in the foreground, and it just ends up being an absolute mess. So try not to get anything like sweeping in front of the camera. Even having characters like as close up as me right now, that can be kind of hard to track because that often is intersecting with a whole bunch of markers and just making them lose their track. So that's tip number 3. Let's go on to the 4th and final tip. I can count, I promise. And that is adding depth into your shot. So what's ideal for tracking software most of the time is to have foreground elements and background elements so that it can really get a good idea of how your camera is moving around. And if we just track a blank wall, there's basically only one dimension that it's tracking, so that can be really difficult to get a good solve on. But hey, that's pretty much it. These are all things that I've made mistakes on in the past and kind of learned from because, like I mentioned, I was banging my head against the wall in post-production and I was like, why didn't I just record better footage? Please learn from me so you don't have to make those mistakes as well. Okay, I'm editing this video and I'm just realizing that that's a lot of tips on what not to do in footage, so I thought I'd show one of the easiest clips I've ever tracked, and that is this. And you'll notice there's a lot of depth in the shot, it's very bright, and the camera isn't too crazy. And all of those things really work together to get something very nice to track. If you're interested in visual effects stuff and you found this video useful, there's a link in the description that says 5 tips for CG integration into live action footage. And when you click this link, it sends you to an email sign up. And when you sign up with your email, I immediately send you an exclusive tutorial on 5 tips for integrating your CG objects into live action footage. Now, I think this can really help you out if you're interested in visual effects. And so if you're up for it, give it a go. But hey, that's about it. I hope you have an excellent day, and cheers.